mortgage, business loans, vehicle loans, etc. So you do need to take additional steps to ensure you and your partner are covered in the event of death or disability of the other, especially if you share financial liabilities, such as children, a mortgage, a business loan, vehicle loan, etc. Just take the time to sit down and actually talk about what it would look like if one of you were to pass away or become incapacitated, which basically means you can't work. So things like disability insurance, term or permanent insurance policies, critical care, mortgage insurance, so on and so forth. Don't just assume you're covered and wait until something happens to take a step. It may be too late at this point. Look for a reputable insurance representative that will actually do a thorough analysis for you and provide this to you along with the supporting rationale. Just because your partner does, so don't make the mistake of assuming that just because your partner does not bring an income, does not mean that they're valuable and don't need to be insured. Think of the monetary costs and the potential for having to take time off work. And all the stay-at-home parents might enjoy this. Perhaps as a fun exercise, you can let your partner leave the country for a week and you can maintain the household on your own while working full-time to support everyone and see how valuable they are. uh, yeah, exactly. So, yeah. So I think if you have any question in your mind of what would happen if there was, some sort of circumstance, it's always good to kind of like seek more information. So, like I said, don't just assume and leave it to the last minute. Okay, we're going to talk about protecting yourself. So this is Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin. They famously coined the phrase conscious uncoupling during their 2014 divorce, which I was always like, oh wow, that's so civil of them. But then I realized, I was like, this woman is divorcing Chris Martin, who is the lead singer of Coldplay. I would not be as conscious uncoupling. I would make sure it hurt a little bit for him before divorcing him. But that's great. That's wonderful for them that they were able to make it so civil. But that is not always the case. So I have commonly seen spouses clear accounts and credit products to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars and leave the other spouse with the bill, and they are perfectly within their legal rights to access these funds. Just for fun, I'll give you an idea of the collections process. So if you are behind on a credit product, they can call you up to 4 times per day for each product. They can take money from your bank account, and they can also freeze your bank account. Not to mention things like taking your vehicle from your driveway. If your mortgage goes past due 60 days, they might start foreclosure. So it's quite a traumatic process to go through in addition to a divorce. So I would say if you feel like things are starting to go south, which I don't think is the case with most people here, but it's always good to take some steps to protect yourself. And also in the reverse, so like joint bank accounts as well. So if you have a joint bank account with somebody, they can actually clear out the entire bank account and close it down. And again, they're perfectly within their legal rights to do so. Now, with that being said, when it comes to the division of marital assets, most of the time they split it right down the middle from what you've accumulated over your marriage. But who knows, the person could skip town and, so on and so forth. Also, know your rights, seek legal and/or professional counsel before you agree to anything. And then just some tips and tricks for protecting yourself. So always seek legal advice around things like inheritance money, cohabitating with somebody in property that you've paid for. So if Again, I don't think it's applicable to people here, but if you have somebody living with you and you're in a conjugal relationship for a certain period of time, that can actually give them full legal rights to the what's coined the marital property, which means they could access half of the equity in your home. Inheritance money does not make up marital property, but if you put it into a joint bank account, you have to split that money with your spouse if anything were to happen. So this is another one, maintain your own credit and score. So I do typically find the lower income partner may defer to their partner's credit. This can be troublesome in the event of death or divorce, as you may be left in a situation of needing to apply for credit, such as for housing. If you move out, you can afford to buy something on your own, you need a mortgage, so on and so forth. Even apartments, I actually had to give more information, more credit information to rent an apartment than I did for a mortgage, believe it or not. So just be aware of that. And it's not even just in the event of divorce, it's also in the event that your partner were to pass away. Let's see here. Being an authorized user on a credit card does nothing to build your credit score. Always be fully aware of what you're signing before you sign it. And this is not just in the case of like a contentious relationship. This is if you're a couple as well. Make sure you're aware of what you're signing. If you have a high amount of assets and you're going into the marriage, especially for older people, I would say a prenuptial agreement. And this again can be controversial because it's like, well, you're forcing me to sign this. Do you feel like the marriage is not going to work out? But also, I feel like you can vouch that they're not marrying you for your money. So it's a coin flip, but you do need to be careful. Believe the best, but plan for the worst. So this one, again, I feel like is a little bit controversial and is really dependent on your situation. But just be careful about being totally financial dependent, especially if you see signs of financial abuse or you're not totally comfortable with the financial situation. I think it's a really good and beautiful thing if you are and if it works and you feel safe in that. But again, you want to plan or hope for the best, but also plan for the worst, I guess. So I wanted to quickly talk about financial abuse in a relationship. Again, if you know anybody who's going through this, you may be able to identify it as well. So a study by the Centers for Financial Security found that 99% of domestic violence also involved financial abuse. And what's more, financial abuse is often the first sign of dating violence and domestic abuse. Consequently, knowing how to identify financial abuse is critical to your safety and security. So things like exploiting your resources, controlling shared assets and resources, and interfering with your job. Okay, and then I wanted to go talk about estate considerations. So documentation is very important. You should have, especially if you're in a marriage, again, and you have joint assets and liabilities and children, you should have a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare directive, although there is some leniency with healthcare directives because as the spouse, usually they will take your directions if your spouse has a health emergency, but it is very important to have these updated because you never know. You should legally designate your spouse as a power of attorney for property and personal care. You might actually be very shocked to find out that if anything were to happen to your spouse and they were to become incapacitated, you don't automatically have rights to make decisions on your partner's behalf. So the Office of Public Guardian and Trustee will actually become a guardian and trustee for your spouse. so essentially the government. And you have to petition this office to become legal guardian of your spouse. You actually have to create a management plan and abide by this plan. They have to approve it, and then you have to provide proof that you're abiding by this plan. Preference is usually given to the spouse, but it could be a lengthy and frustrating legal process, so it's better to set up documentation ahead of time so you can literally just walk into the bank, provide the documentation, they'll verify it, and then you can act as power of attorney for your spouse. Just review and update your documents regularly. If you are the primary manager of the finances, consider leaving a reference guide for the surviving spouse. There's nothing worse than having to deal with the grief of losing your spouse, and then also if you've never had to navigate the world of finance, having to figure that out, you're left in a very vulnerable position. So it's always a good idea to at least sit down and talk about it with your partner. Okay, and have an emergency fund set up. So the estate process can be lengthy. If you have a lot of assets in separate names, you may not automatically be entitled to those assets. It could take up to a year, year and a half for the funds to come through. So you do need to have money in place to keep the household afloat until the money does come through. Again, it's important that one spouse have a working knowledge of how the finances are managed, so on and so forth. It's really sad. I know it seems like you're helping your spouse when you're the one who does it all, but it's really sad when the partner passes away and the other spouse has no idea what's going on. And again, you are left very vulnerable if you're not sure and you're completely unaware of how to manage finances. So, just for fun, because I heard that there was some people that are not married, so I thought we could go through like the red flags and the green flags, financial red flags and green flags. So when you're looking at a potential partner, I think money, as we saw before by those studies, money is so important. And causes so much so much kind of tension, even in the best of relationships, or maybe doesn't cause tension. But I think it's important to pay attention to your potential partner's money, how they handle their money. So some potential red flags. So unresolved substance abuse or addictions. There's nothing wrong, again, if somebody has struggled with substance abuse or an addiction, none of us are perfect, but if they have not resolved it yet, that is a major red flag, and I would say don't move forward until you feel like that is resolved, because that can cause huge issues in relationships. Dishonesty, so if you find somebody is being dishonest about money, and you're dating, that's a huge red flag. Excessive debt with no plan. So again, nobody is perfect, and life is hard and expensive, so I wouldn't just judge someone based on the fact that they have debt, but if they have no plan to repay and no concern, so like a lack of concern of the debt, that should be a red flag, because if it bothers you, it's going to bother you even more so when you're married. Unsustainable spending habits. So I definitely think when it comes to things like spending and money management, it can be very subjective. So just be aware of somebody else's spending habits and make sure you're comfortable with that before you get married to them. Excessively cheap with no reason. This was in the list of what people thought about, so yeah. It's nice when they're a little cheap, but then it gets to a point where you're like, okay, this is too much. And then inability to contribute. Again, just be sure you're comfortable with your partner's level of contribution. If they say they want to be like a stay-at-home parent, and you're not okay with that, then don't go into the relationship. But if you're okay with it, then that's fine. But if you want somebody who is going to contribute to the relationship and to the finances, make sure that you are aware of that before you get into a relationship. And then lifestyle discrepancies. Is it very important for them to have like a really nice fancy car? Would they be okay driving like the 1990 Toyota, so on and so forth? And then just for fun, green flags, generosity, that's always good. Financial awareness, so kind of like an awareness of what's going in, what's going out, what things cost. Maybe think twice before spending a huge amount. Debt averse, again, debt can be subjective, but I think it's better to be with somebody that is averse to debt, or at least one of you is averse and the other one is willing to go along with the one that's averse. So ability to control spending. I definitely love to buy shoes, but I can control it if need be. So keep that in mind when you're looking at a potential partner. It's also important to look at, not be too judgmental. Similar financial outlook. So it's nice when you're on the same page. Similar spending habits. Contributes to the household. Again, this can be subjective, as long as you're comfortable with how much they're willing to contribute. And then work ethic, just that they have a work ethic that you're comfortable with. Everybody is different, and there's lots of different types of couples and types of families. You just want to make sure you're with somebody that is a good match. And just our last slide here. So how to talk about money with your partner or a potential partner. Create a list of topics. Set aside a specific time to talk when you know you will be talking about it, so you can mentally prepare for it. Avoid judgment and ask for clarification. So if you feel like your partner is saying something really crazy and out there, maybe ask for clarification and find out where it's coming from. And then create an action plan together. So if you're having a really hard time budgeting or managing the budget, make sure before leaving the conversation, you actually have a plan in place. So the conversation did actually produce something, and then move forward with the plan and maybe schedule a time to come back and talk about the plan and how it went. Make note of hot button areas that you usually fight about, and I personally think get creative to try and find ways around that hot button area. So as we saw in those comments of the Dave Ramsey, the post that he had made, a lot of partners are creative in how they manage accounts, so on and so forth. So if you find you're upset at one partner for spending too much, maybe let them have their own account so you don't have to see their spending, so on and so forth. And then try to be objective. This is totally unhelpful for the married people that might be having issues, but if you're not willing to be flexible and make changes, then perhaps it is better to not get married. And I think when you go into a marriage, it should be compromise, I guess. So if you're not willing to compromise, then it's probably better to not jump into it. So that's about it that I have. These are my sources.
Thank you so much, Katharina. I'm really grateful for you and for what you shared with us today. I know that you got all that from me.
cry on the phone.
So anyway, let's just chat. Anything you want to talk about that Katharina shared, just have a chance to do that for about 10 minutes. Thanks.
Pardon?